Thank you, Brian, and thank you to everyone who's joined the session today on how to design websites with privacy in mind. So today we'll be talking about why you should design websites with privacy in mind, who's responsible for privacy, what is privacy by design, what not to do, some examples of best practices, and some tips that I think you might find useful when designing websites with privacy in mind. So before we start, I did want to give two disclaimers. Anything that I talked to you about today is going to be presented for informational purposes only and is not intended to be legal advice. So if you do have specific legal questions, you should speak to an attorney about those. And second, I am an attorney, not a designer. So I'll speak to you about the compliance requirements, but it will be up to you to make sure that meeting those privacy requirements actually looks good. So a little bit about me. As Brian said, I'm a privacy and technology attorney. I'm licensed in Illinois. I'm a certified information privacy professional. I'm certified by the International Association of Privacy Professionals. I'm the president and legal engineer of Termageddon, which is a software as a service company that has generated thousands of privacy policies and kept them up to date with changing legislation. I'm also the vice chair of the American Bar Association's e-privacy committee and the chair of the Chicago chapter of the International Association of Privacy Professionals. So I've actually taught classes on privacy at the Illinois State Bar Association and the Chicago Bar Association as well. So I've been practicing in privacy for approximately 5 years now. And apart from working in privacy, I'm also a beekeeper and a chicken keeper. So if anybody has any questions about those, let me know. So let's start off with talking about why you should design websites with privacy in mind. So some of you that have been designing websites for a while now may be a bit confused as to why we're talking about websites and privacy today, and maybe asking why you need to take privacy into account when designing websites at all. And to be honest, if we were talking 5 or 10 years ago, we probably wouldn't be talking, and I probably wouldn't be here. So if you think about designing websites 5 or 10 years ago, privacy wasn't really that big of a deal. So at most, there was a template privacy policy on a website, and you put it there and never saw it again. So what's changed, and why is privacy important now? Why do you need to pay attention to this now? So if we look back at 2018, that was a really big year for privacy. And two things happened there. So first, the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, and the European Union's privacy law, the General Data Protection Regulation, went into effect. So these events caused consumers to realize the danger of sharing their personal information online, and also showed them that certain governments can provide privacy rights and protections for consumers. So as a result, consumers in the US started to pressure their state legislators to pass and propose privacy laws that protect personal information and to provide consumers with certain privacy rights, namely to ensure that another Cambridge Analytica scandal didn't happen again. And what's unfortunate there is that consumers lumped in Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, which collects the personal information of, billions of people, with small businesses. So they wanted these requirements to apply to every business regardless of their size, even though the original thing that spurred this movement was with companies that are, huge, that make billions of dollars and collect the personal information of billions of consumers. So as more privacy laws pass, this will lead to more privacy requirements for websites. In addition, some privacy laws, such as the GDPR, which is the EU's privacy law, require data protection by design. And failure to follow those principles could get your clients fined. And fines range from $2,500 per website visitor to 20 million euros or more in total, which, as you know, can add up, especially if the website has, a few visitors per month at least. And then lastly, privacy can actually be a competitive advantage. A recent study by Axios found that 93% of Americans would actually switch to a company that prioritizes privacy, which I think demonstrates that privacy can be a good thing for businesses. So that's why we need to pay attention to privacy when it comes to clients' websites. Now, I know the slide is very overwhelming and we won't go through each of these bills one by one, but this is our privacy bill tracker that shows all of the proposed privacy bills that are being considered in the US right now. As you can see, there are over 20 of these bills that could impact privacy requirements for websites. In the US, we don't have a federal privacy law that applies to most small business websites. We do have a privacy law for healthcare and finance and children's information, but nothing really that comprises most of the small business websites that you see. So each state is taking it upon themselves to propose and pass privacy bills and to include privacy rights for their residents. So as you can see, this is something that you can't just ignore and hope that it goes away, because it really isn't going away. As more and more of these bills get passed, we'll see more and more states providing privacy rights to consumers and requiring websites to meet certain privacy requirements. You can actually find the most up-to-date version of this tracker on our blog at termageddon.com, and that's where I keep track of all of the privacy bills that I track on a daily basis. Now, your next question is probably going to be, who is responsible for meeting these these requirements? Is it you, or is it your clients that are responsible? So in an ideal world, your client is the one that is responsible for understanding what requirements apply to them and for making sure that their website meets those requirements. There are a couple of problems with that. Obviously, we don't live in an ideal world. So a couple issues with that statement. So first, if your contract states that you'll ensure that the website is compliant with all applicable laws, rules, and regulations, then that responsibility shifts to you. So at that point, you'd be the one that's responsible for making sure that your client's website that you're building is meeting these requirements. And even though I'm a privacy attorney, I used to work with agencies in the past, I would say that it is very, very important that you check your contracts and make sure that your contract does not include that sentence of, we're responsible for making sure that your website is compliant. That is really not a good idea. So make sure you check your contracts that they don't include that. Second, if your client does know all of these requirements and tells you exactly how to meet them, you'll still need to know what these concepts are, what they mean, and how they relate to the design of the website. So if you're one of the very lucky few whose clients know all of these requirements, you'll still need to know what these things mean. So I definitely suggest still continuing to pay attention here. And then lastly, when it comes to reality, most of your clients probably don't know what these requirements are. They're probably not even realizing that their website is collecting personal information through forms or analytics. And your clients are probably looking to you to help them understand and become aware of the features that collect personal information and that impact privacy on the website. So it's kind of a team effort here to make sure that your client's website meets those privacy requirements. It's both you and your client that should be involved in this portion of the work. Now, regardless of your client's experience with privacy, it's very important that you protect yourself. So as fines for noncompliance with privacy laws start at $2,500 per website visitor, you can see how those fines can lead to huge amounts. So let's say your client's website has 100 website visitors from California per month. It collects personal information through a form or through analytics. That fine would be calculated as 2,500 times 100 if your client does not have a compliant privacy policy or something similar. So you can see how that could really add up. So you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself and make sure that your clients sign a contract that clearly states that you're not responsible for and do not guarantee that the website will be compliant with privacy laws. I really cannot emphasize that enough in terms of protecting yourself, whether you're a freelancer, whether you're an agency, or whether it's just a one-off type of thing. So now that we kind of talked about the background of privacy and what these things mean, let's talk about what we mean by saying designing websites with privacy in mind. So a really smart lady by the name of Anne Cavoukian came up with the concept of privacy by design. And that concept basically means ensuring the protection of privacy by integrating considerations of privacy issues from the very beginning of development. Whether you're developing software, whether you're developing websites, privacy by design is going to be your friend when making sure that you are taking privacy into account when doing your design. So if you want to build websites with privacy in mind, you'll actually have to follow 7 principles that comprise privacy by design. So first, proactive, not reactive, preventative, not remedial. Now, what does this mean? It means that you must anticipate and prevent privacy invasive events before they happen. So for example, you can prevent data breaches by having your clients sign up for a maintenance plan that includes updating plugins and making sure that the website is secure and that the data is not breached on the website. That's something that's a proactive measure to make sure that privacy invasive events do not happen. Second, privacy is the default setting. No action should be required by the individual to protect their privacy. Privacy should be built into the website by default. For example, the website should be collecting only the information that is absolutely necessary and nothing more. Any privacy-related checkboxes for agreeing to a privacy policy or for the agreement to collect personal information should be unselected by default. And this is actually a great example of when it comes to working with your clients. I work with a lot of businesses who build their privacy policies with us. And one of the things that we see is, let's say the client is collecting names, emails, and phone numbers on a contact form. And our next question is, how do you use that information? Well, we don't use it at all. Okay, well, if you're not using that information, then why are you collecting it? There's no purpose for you collecting that. So we would recommend to make sure that your clients collect as little personal information and make sure that the information that they are collecting, they actually need it and they're actually using it. Privacy embedded into design. Privacy is not an add-on and should be an essential component on the core functionality that is actually being delivered to your clients. You should rely on accepted standards and frameworks, and the privacy impacts of the technology should be minimized to the extent possible. So that's what privacy embedded into design means. Full functionality, positive sum, not zero sum. This may surprise some of you, but it is possible to both have privacy and security and a way to find a win-win scenario. For example, by having people actively opt in to your email marketing list, you're sending emails only to the people who are actively interested in your services or the products that you're offering, which can actually lead to higher reading and conversion rates on your email marketing. So it is possible that privacy can be a win-win scenario. You can protect consumers' privacy by making sure that they opt into your list. And you can win by making sure that the people who want the email actually get it. And that can increase your conversion rates because the people are actually interested in hearing from you. End-to-end security, full life cycle protection. Strong security measures are essential to privacy from start to finish. All data should be securely obtained, retained, and then destroyed at the end. Again, I cannot tell you how many business owners retain personal information forever. That's not something that should be happening. Retaining personal information forever only makes the cost of a data breach more expensive, especially information that you actually don't need. In addition, a lot of clients have no idea what to do if they're asked to delete personal information. So if your client receives a request from one of their customers saying, please delete my personal information, whether they're exercising their privacy rights or are no longer doing business with the client or for whatever reason, most clients of yours would just freeze and probably contact you and ask you what to do. How do I delete this personal information from my website? So make sure that everything is kept in a way that allows you to delete the data, because you can almost bet that you're going to receive this type of a request in the future as more consumers receive those rights. And it's a good idea to know exactly where information is kept. So creating a data map or something similar to say, all right, here's somebody that submits a form. That form goes into an email that is sent to your client. So the email is stored there. It's stored in the back end of WordPress or whatever CMS you're using. The client puts it into HubSpot or Salesforce or something similar. So having a data map of where the data goes as soon as it's collected from the website and what is done with it can help you find it a lot easier. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Visibility and transparency, keep it open. Users should be able to easily understand what personal information is collected, what is done with that information, and who that information is shared with. So make sure that you tell your clients that they need to have a privacy policy and that the policy can easily be found on the website as well. And we'll actually talk about the design of the policy and how to make sure that the policy can easily be found by consumers a little bit later when we give some examples of what to do and what not to do. And then lastly, respect for user privacy. Keep it user-centric. You should offer strong measures such as strong privacy defaults, appropriate notice, and empowering user-friendly options. So make sure that you are providing people with the option to protect their privacy. Don't keep things hidden from the consumer, in the hopes that they'll never find the privacy policy and you'll never find a privacy request. That's really not the right way to go about things. And for companies that are very open with their privacy practices, you would actually be surprised by the fact that they get less requests from consumers and less questions about privacy because all of their questions have already been answered by the privacy policy or by the website. So it can actually help reduce the number of support requests and questions in the first place. So that is kind of the theory behind privacy by design and how to, design websites with privacy in mind. Those are kind of the high level explanations of how this goes. Now, theory is all good and well, but let's take a look at, what this looks like in practice actually, and some examples of websites that are doing it well and some examples of websites that, have some room for improvement. All right, so we'll start off with room for improvement, what not to do here. So here's some examples of bad privacy practices. So if you look on the left, you'll see a cookie banner that has two options: accept all cookies or manage preferences. We've all seen these cookie banners on pretty much every website that you go to, and they range from, you agree to us collecting cookies by staying on this website, or just clicking OK, or clicking accept or deny. Now, when you have a cookie banner, you're trying to comply with the General Data Protection Regulation, with the UK Data Protection Act of 2018, and the e-privacy directive. Those are the laws that kind of dictate these cookie banners. Now, these laws have very clear directions on consent and what consent means. So according to these laws, consent must be freely given, informed, and an unambiguous indication of the individual's wishes, by which he or she, by a clear affirmative action, signifies agreement to the processing of their personal data. What that means is that you need to have a clear option of yes or no. As you can see here, there is no option. It's just manage preferences, and manage preferences isn't the same as decline. And then you have accept. So really, this type of a cookie banner is not gathering appropriate consent and is not compliant with the privacy laws that dictate the requirements for this cookie banner. So if you have this cookie banner to comply with a privacy law and it's designed in such a way that it doesn't actually comply with the privacy law, it's essentially useless. So I would definitely recommend to have a cookie banner that has an accept and that has a deny, so it has a very clear choice. So in addition, this pop-up is actually a great example of dark patterns, which is a practice that makes navigation to elements that businesses would prefer users not to access, like account deletion or requests for personal information, intentionally opaque and confusing. Dark patterns are actually illegal under certain privacy laws, such as the California Consumer Privacy Act or the CCPA. So you'll want to avoid designs such as this that force consumers into a certain choice that negatively impacts their privacy. So again, don't use these types of cookie banners. They're all too prevalent and they're being used way too often and they're just not compliant. On the right, you'll see a second example. This is a checkout form. So you can click to agree to the terms and conditions. But then if you click more info, you'll see that you're also agreeing to receiving marketing emails and to having your personal information shared with third parties. This is a clear example of failure to show transparent information about privacy, failure to get consent, and pretty much tricking the consumer to sign up for marketing emails, which is definitely not a good idea. In addition, when you have somebody agree to terms and conditions, a terms and conditions is different than a privacy policy. So those two should be kept separate. So if somebody reads, I have read and understood the terms and conditions and I agree to that, that has no bearing on privacy. And in here, these two things are kind of combined, which is very confusing to the consumer. And again, is a practice that should definitely be avoided. So this is another set of examples of things that you shouldn't be doing. On the left is a contact form where users can submit their personal information, so names and emails. As you can see here, there is no checkbox to agree to a privacy policy. So you're not getting consent for collecting this information. And I definitely recommend getting a checkbox to gain consent, as that is required by multiple privacy laws. And make sure that you do not pre-check that box. Now, some people think that if I'm using a form provider, such as Gravity Forms or something like that, that the third-party provider is the one that's collecting this information by the form, and that their privacy policy holds, and that their privacy policy is protecting you. That is not the case. A form provider does not protect you from privacy law violations. So just because you're using a form provider, it still means that you are collecting this information. It still means that you are required to have a privacy policy. In addition, if you're using reCAPTCHA or something like that, you can see on the little icon, it has a privacy and terms there. That's the privacy and terms for reCAPTCHA itself, not for your website. So don't rely on that as a form of protection. On the right, you'll see that someone combined a terms of service and a privacy policy under the same link in the footer. You can see terms and privacy here. This is a very, very common mistake. We often see websites that say legal notices or terms and privacy or things that you need to know about legal, things like that. And doing this actually violates several privacy laws, as it's very confusing to the consumer as to what they're actually looking at. And you actually cannot get consent if you combine a terms and a privacy, because you cannot parse out what the consumer is actually agreeing to. So the consumer says, yes, I agree to the terms, but I didn't agree to the privacy, or vice versa. So you really need to separate the pages and the links to the privacy policy and the terms of service. So have a separate privacy policy and have a separate terms of service. Okay, so now that we've seen some examples of things not to do, let's take some examples of best practices. So on the left, you'll see a clearly displayed privacy policy. And when it comes to the posting of a privacy policy, multiple privacy laws actually require the privacy policy to be conspicuously posted on the website. And what does it mean to conspicuously post? Contrasting colors, such as black and white, different font from the surrounding text, and different size font from the surrounding text. Now, by different size, I don't mean smaller. It actually means larger. So you really have to make sure that your privacy policy pops on that page and that the consumer can easily find it. You see a lot of businesses have a video in the background and then like a light colored privacy policy link that's pretty much invisible, or a gray footer and a slightly lighter gray link to the privacy policy. None of that works. Make sure that it's very, very apparent and very, very easy to see where the privacy policy is, and make sure that you separate these policies separately. So on the right side, you'll see a contact form that collects names and emails, and it requires the users to agree to a privacy policy before they can submit their personal information. So this is a great way to demonstrate consent, that you obtain consent from the consumer before you collected their personal information. A couple tips here: make sure that you do not pre-check this box. So leave it unchecked by default, and do not allow the users to submit the form without checking the box. So that's a great way to show consent, because a consumer could not have submitted their personal information to you in the first place if you didn't have that checkbox there. And make sure that the privacy policy is clearly hyperlinked and available to read for your consumers. Don't just have, I agree to the privacy policy, and then if you actually try to click on the hyperlink, it goes nowhere. Make sure it goes to an actual privacy policy. Now, here's another set of best practices here. So on the left, you'll see a cookie pop-up. This is actually from the website of the UK Information Commissioner's Office, which determines best practices for privacy and enforces privacy laws. As you can see, they have the necessary cookies enabled. Necessary cookies are absolutely essential to the proper functioning of the website. So those can be enabled by default. You don't need to get consent to those. But unnecessary cookies such as analytics should be disabled by default, and the user should be given a real choice whether they want to consent to that collection or not. So that means that the cookies are on the off, and then only if the consumer clicks on, that's only when they are actually enabled. And again, analytics is not necessary for the operation of the website. A lot of people try to argue that it is, but it isn't. So it should be disabled by default. And on the right, you'll actually see a new notice that has come up from Apple's software update. And that requires you to click whether or not you want to allow tracking or allow the app not to track you. I actually experienced this myself last night going onto Hulu from my Apple TV. And it was really cool because the Ask App Not to Track was the default selection, right? So that's a great, great example of privacy by design. There are some controversial things about this new update, including competition and things like that. But I did want to note that it is a good example of privacy by design. All right, and now for the last couple minutes that I have, I wanted to give you a couple final tips of things to keep in mind when designing websites. So first, make sure that the website is not collecting more personal information than is needed. Make sure that you're ready to help your clients in deleting personal information and honoring other privacy rights. Your clients will most definitely be contacting you about this, freaking out about what to do. And it's a great thing to create a procedure right now to see, all right, if I get this type of request from my client, this is exactly where I would go. And this is exactly what I would tell them. Make sure that you explain to your clients what services the website will be using that collect personal information. A lot of agencies and a lot of website designers don't tell their clients that they're installing Google Analytics. If your client doesn't need these things, then the website shouldn't have them because Google Analytics will actually subject your client to multiple privacy laws that they need to comply to. So make sure that you're very clear with your client, okay, these are the things that are collecting information. Provide a way to gather proper consent. Make sure that checkboxes are unchecked by default. Make sure that forms have that I agree to the privacy policy checkbox. And then keep privacy requirements in mind when designing and developing websites. It's really important that you keep this at the top of your mind. Maybe jot down a couple notes when you're going through the website with your clients about what things you're implementing that will be privacy forward. So those are my final tips for you. And if there are any questions, if you haven't put them in the chat, right now would be a great time to ask them. And Brian, I'll throw this back to you.